Well, welcome to another Little Green Workshops video tutorial. This time we're making Wensleydale. Here's the ingredients: 8 litres of milk, 1/8 of a teaspoon of mesophilic culture, half a teaspoon of liquid rennet, half a teaspoon of calcium chloride if you're using homogenised milk, and 3 teaspoons of non-iodised salt. And optionally, you can add in some dried sage leaves. Now, speaking of sage leaves, here are the ones that I picked from my garden. I put them into the oven. There's the pot with the utensils sterilising inside. I've got some boiling water in there and the cheesecloths. And I've got everything laid out ready to go. The culture, the mini spoons, the measured out rennet and calcium chloride, and the milk. So I've already added the calcium chloride and I brought the temperature up to 30 degrees Celsius. Now this is the target temperature at the moment. And we're going to add the starter culture now. So there's our starter culture, just gone in there, let it rehydrate for a little bit. And then we're going to stir that in for about a minute. So we stir top to bottom, make sure it's thoroughly mixed in, and now we're going to allow the starter culture to do its work for 45 minutes, and we have to maintain the target temperature of 30 degrees Celsius during that time. With my little double boiler method, it stays at 30 degrees for the whole 45 minutes. So 45 minutes later, we take the lid back off and we give it a bit of a stir, to make sure the heat is distributed evenly. And we're going to add in the liquid rennet next. So before we add the rennet, we must ensure that the milk is moving all the time. So just pour in the rennet there. So we stir that for a minute, no more. Top to bottom. Just thoroughly mix through. So you're just going to make sure that that rennet has been thoroughly mixed. Okay, then we pop the lid back on and we let the rennet do its work. Just make sure the temperature's okay there. Make sure the rennet does its work for 45 minutes. That's how long this is going to take to coagulate the milk. So after the 45 minutes has elapsed, we're going to check for a clean break. You do that by simply popping your finger in the milk, lifting it up, and if the curd splits aside cleanly, then the rennet has done its job. If it's not giving you a clean break, I will let the curd sit for about another 30 minutes. Now we're going to cut the curd now, and we're going to cut it into 1/2-inch cubes, which is about 13 mil. So I've just sped that up for video purposes. So we cut it one way, then the next. And then we cut it diagonally. Trying to get the cubes the same size all the way around is a little bit difficult when using a curd knife. So that's all fully cut now. Now we're going to stir that up. And we're going to stir the curds for 10 minutes. And while we're doing that, we'll just break up any really large pieces that are sitting on the bottom. So that's been going for 10 minutes, and then you let it sit for 5 minutes. So as you can see there, a lot of whey has expelled. So we're going to stir that again now for 10 minutes. So just making sure that the curds don't knit together. They have a tendency to do that. So we're going to let that rest for 15. And we're going to stir it now whilst raising the temperature up to 32 degrees. And we're going to stir that for 2 hours. Yes, 2 hours of stirring for this recipe. So you don't have to stir continuously, just make sure that every so often you come back and make sure the curds have not knitted together. So after 2 hours of stirring, you can see that the little cubes of curd have shrunk quite dramatically. Now it's time to drain the curds. And we're just pouring that using a colander and a cheesecloth. That cheesecloth had been boiled beforehand. So I've got clean hands here, so just getting rid of all the excess curd that's stuck in the bottom of the pot. Now that's draining away. Now what we're going to do is we're going to tie it into a ball. So just tie opposite ends of the cheesecloth up. And what we're going to do over the next 2 hours is that we're going to let the curds rest for 15 minutes, and then we're going to open up the package and we're going to break the curd into smaller pieces. So that's initial 15 minutes resting. So you just open that up, you'll see that the curds have knitted together. Now we're just going to break those up into probably half thumbnail size pieces. It breaks up fairly readily. So we're going to do this over the next 2 hours every 15 minutes. I've just sped it up there, so it's pretty easy to do. So you're doing this 8 times over 2 hours. And then we tie it up again after we've done that. You just tie it up because you don't want any flies or anything getting in there, hairs or dirt or what have you. Just protects the curd. So you can see that the bundle of curds has reduced in size quite dramatically because a fair bit of whey is now expelled. This is the last time I'm going to break it up. So this is after 2 hours of doing that every 15 minutes. So you can see it's starting to dry out a fair bit. It is moist, don't get me wrong, it is still moist, but it is a lot drier than when we started. So just make sure that's all broken up. It has to be all broken up before we add the salt to the cheese. So we're adding 3 teaspoons of non-iodized salt. Now preferably you can use salt without anti-caking agent in. This is just regular table salt without iodine. I prefer these days to use cheese salt, which doesn't have a anti-clumping agent. So once all the salt is added to the curds, and we just mill it in. So mill the salt all the way through. And then we're going to fill the cheesecloth lined mould with half of the curds. Now this next part is optional, of course. I prefer it with sage in the middle layer. So I've just filled it up, half filled it now. And then I'll just pat that down so it forms a bit of a layer. Nice smooth layer for me to put my dried sage leaves on. Now these were out of my garden. I put them in the oven at 120 degrees Celsius. So that is dried out, and that sanitizes. Make sure that there are no bacteria or anything or yeasts living on the leaves. So we just make a single layer of the leaves there. Now this sage gives the Wensleydale an amazing flavour. It certainly does permeate throughout the whole cheese. It doesn't taste like, say, sage stuffing or anything like that. It's a very subtle taste. So once we've put all the sage in, we then put the remainder of the curds in. Just ladle those in. So now we're just going to press it down a little bit, and then we're going to fold the cheesecloth over the top. And then we're going to put our plastic follower on the top of the mould, just like that. Put our spring on and put it into the press. Now the first pressing is for 5 kilograms for 15 minutes. So I'm only just barely going to squeeze the spring down for a 5 kilo press. So 15 minutes later we come back and we take the cheese out of the mould. Now it's very delicate at this stage, it hasn't fully pressed down, so you just got to be careful when you take it out. You don't want it falling apart. So we're just going to flip that over gently. See a little bit of the sage there. Just flip that over for its second pressing. So it's formed its shape, which is good. And we just fold the cheesecloth over and then pop it back into the mould and top with the follower. sure there's no creases in the cheesecloth, because that'll make a crease in the outside layer of the cheese. So I'm just going to fold that over, pop the top follower back on again, and pop the spring on. Now we're going to press at 25 kilos, so we're going to fully close the spring. And we're going to leave that then at room temperature for 12 hours. So this is best done overnight, late at night. So you can see the spring's fully closed there. And what I'm going to do, once we remove it from the cheesecloth the next day, we're going to place that on a board and air dry for 2 days. And then we're going to wax the cheese, and we're going to store it into our cheese fridge at 13 degrees Celsius at 80 to 85% humidity, and it needs to be aged for up to 3 months. You can eat it as little as 3 weeks, but 3 months is what I recommend. So that's air drying there, and the fully waxed one was at the start of the show. Thanks very much, and don't forget to drop over to littlegreenworkshops.com.au.